Hello everyone, myself Shrinki Mehta and I'm a soft skills trainer. Well, talking about the question that how teachers can make a safe environment. So I would like to say that every teacher's dream is to have a pleasant classroom. This can be accomplished without jeopardizing kids' performance, academic performance or personal development. Students can become self-learners when teachers adopt the student-centric approach, that is learning by doing, when the students are actively involved or engaged in the actual learning process. As teachers, we must model the behavior of the child as we want them to exhibit by acknowledging them with some rules which can maintain the decor and the discipline in the classroom. In order to foster their emotional and social security, teachers should act as leaders rather than directors. So we should lead rather than direct them, right? Aside from that, constructive criticism is important to academics performance, to their academics performance. So when we talk about subject teaching, we need to connect with the real life situation that will improve the students' involvement in the subject. We must establish a positive relationship with each student by getting to know them and value them, because what I feel is we need to follow the thumb rule of praising in public and criticizing in private, right? Furthermore, offering students with the opportunities and choices to speak in the classroom, to engage in the classroom, will help in the development of trust and confidence in them. It is critical for their social development that teachers allow them time or opportunities to interact with the peers or seniors, and give them enough time to play with the classmates as much as needed. This will enhance only interaction. Teachers who can strike the proper balance between pleasure and hard work will not only have happier kids under their care and guidance, but they will also have better grades. So let us be a cheerful.
Hello, we are the S Trio, Soumya, Sumaira, and Shaheen.
Welcome to inspirED.
Welcome, beautiful girls, and welcome all of you to inspirED. inspirED is a conference that brings together diverse people to reimagine education. And there really couldn't be a more important year post-pandemic than this year to do this.
And because we believe that fun is really important in education, we're going to do our opening as a fun rapid fire quiz. Here is how we'll play. Shahin Didi will ask one of us a question and we'll answer. Are you ready, Sumaira?
Yes, but Soumya, what will we do? All these people listening shouldn't get bored. Can they answer too?
Great idea, Sumaira.
Okay, so this is how it's going to work. I'm going to ask one of these two lovely ladies a question. And as I'm asking them a question, we want you to be answering the question in your own minds or in the chat box if you would rather do that. I hope you're all ready. Sumaira, Soumya, are you ready?
Yes, Didi.
Great. So let's hear what kids really think about very, very important issues. Sumaira, starting with you, what is one thing you really don't like about the Indian education system?
I can see marks are given too much importance. There are learnings beyond marks. There are many friends in my class who do not score well. However, they can dance, sing, and play and paint wonderfully.
Beautiful. So you're talking about marks being too important and the need for the arts and other ways of learning. Thanks, Sumaira. Soumya, over to you. When you think about a dream school, what is one thing you envision?
I envision celebration of collaboration over competition.
Beautiful. I often think that if we only remembered that schools were for learning and not for achievement and who is at the top, but everybody's learning and everybody's progress, the system would be very, very different. Sumaira, parents, as you think about parents, your parents and other parents, do you think parents play a role in your learning?
Yes, definitely. Even my mother helped me. It doesn't matter if she knows English or not. Parents can help by reminding our timetable, homework, setting a study and playtime for us, and checking our progress with Didis and Bhaiyas.
Thank you, Sumaira. Soumya, what is one quality that a great teacher has?
I think it would be patience, patience while teaching and while awaiting improvement in your students.
A thought on patience there. Sumaira, when you think about the last 2 years and the pandemic, what was most difficult for you?
The actual difficulty was learning online.
Yeah, learning online. We'll go a little bit more into that in a minute. But before that, Soumya, what's the best way to learn?
It has to be hands-on experiential learning, learning by doing.
Learning by doing. And I'm assuming if you asked 10 of your friends, they may find different ways for each one. And that's really the difficulty of being a great teacher. How do you reach out to different kids in different ways to learn? Sumaira, what is a value that you think all children should learn?
I think respect and kindness, because it will help us forever. Like if we show respect and kindness towards other people, they will also show respect and kindness towards us. So it will help us improve us.
Thank you, Sumaira. Soumya, big question for you on assessment of learning. How should learning really be assessed?
I I think, as you said about the previous question, right, uniquely tailored assessments for each one of us. Because also, as Einstein said once, that we cannot test a fish by its ability to climb a tree.
I love that. Love that quote. Sumaira, back to you and back to the question of online learning. Can you talk about whether you liked, you mentioned that you did not like online learning. Can you say why you didn't like online learning?
Because there are plenty of problems like internet disturbance, and we can't meet our friends too, and etc.
Yeah, I think friends is a big part of why we go to school. Soumya, who can change the system?
I think you, me, and us, I think all of us can. And I think, in fact, coming to inspirED is also one of the ways.
Beautiful. Sumaira, being a student yourself, can you teach others?
Yes, of course. I teach my little brother also.
Yeah, so lovely to hear that. And Soumya, last question to you, and perhaps the biggest question. If you were the education minister in India, what is one thing you would do?
Out of so many things to do, I think first on my agenda would be creating a panel of student leaders who will be included in policy and decision making.
Beautiful. Thank you, girls, so much for your answers. Soumya has been on multiple panels with us before. For Sumaira, it's her very first time. I just met Sumaira last week and found her so insightful in her answers that asked her to join today. Thank you so much for your answers. We hope for all of you listening that inspirED is a chance to really listen, to talk to people with very, very different and diverse perspectives, and to leave with some answers, but we hope in some ways that you leave with really good questions that you're asking yourself. And most of all, we hope that you leave inspirED a little more committed than you already are to really reimagining the education system for all our children.
And that all of you leave inspired, right, Didi? Isn't that why this conference is called inspirED?
Speaking of inspired, Sumaira, let's sing a song that gives me a lot of inspiration. It's really simple, and I think we can all learn it in the next 2 minutes.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes to learn the song. This song is about light. It is about potential, my potential, your potential, every single child's potential. Girls, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, I'll sing one line and then the girls will repeat after me, and all of you on the call will learn this song in the next minute and a half. This little light of mine,
This little light of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine.
I'm gonna let it shine.
This little light of mine,
this little light of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine.
I'm gonna let it shine.
This little light of mine,
this little light of mine,
I'm gonna let it shine.
I'm gonna let it shine.
Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
let it shine, let it shine, let it shine.
We hope inspirED is a space for you to shine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Roshni.
Shaheen, how are you?
Very, very well. It's so lovely to have you join us and our students today.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Roshni, as I said a few minutes ago, inspirED is really a space for us to hear from such diverse perspectives, really honest thoughts about education. And so as someone who's been such a role model in the field of education for all children, I'm going to just jump in and ask you some difficult questions that may or may not have answers, but would love to hear what's on your mind. And if there's anything else that you want to share with our audience, please feel free to put that in as well.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Starting off, Roshni, when you think of the term world-class education, what comes to mind? What is the picture that you're able to paint?
I think the operative word, Shaheen, in world class is world. So the first thing that comes to mind is global exposure, and how can one soak in as much of it, that the world is collapsing on us every moment that we speak, and boundaries are breaking, people are that much more connected. So global exposure is one thought when it comes to world-class education. The other is entrepreneurship. I think there are certain values and principles of entrepreneurship which can be embedded much earlier in a student's learning journey. I think a lot of students tend to come across these thoughts perhaps in latter years of school or in college when they meet other kids, or they think about, what am I going to do, when am I going to get a job? Am I going to, start a company of my own? While many succeed, many more fail. So I think those, skills of critical thinking, analytical thinking, flexibility, agility, some of that in the entrepreneurial mindset, and the ability to live with uncertainty, and if we can bring that earlier into world-class education in schools, it's perhaps better. And the third one, which even today I think is not a focus in schools, is the focus on EQ, so emotional quotient. I think lots of focus even today tends to be IQ, and however the world is getting more complex. The world that students are going to is complex, and it's only going to get more complex. So skills around communication, collaboration, relationship building, actual the social fabric of understanding your own social fabric and the social fabric of those around you is very critical. And the sooner we can do it with students, the better it is.
Yeah, such powerful ideas. And when you think about EQ and you think about our global connectedness and entrepreneurship, which is so important, and underlying that there are so many skills. You listed out some of them when you spoke about entrepreneurship. Tell me what you're seeing a teacher do when you walk into a classroom that is fostering the world-class education that you just described. What are you seeing the teacher and students do?
So I think the teacher has to be very dynamic and very contrarian. So I actually see the teacher doing perhaps a lot more of what you and I grew up with when there was no tech. So which is actually going back to some of the basics, which is relying on books, reading, asking of questions. Assuming we went to the better educational schools, asking of questions, doing stuff by hand, not so much iPad and digital literacy. I think what we miss, it was perhaps much more of a novelty, Shaheen, when you and I were growing up, to have tech in the classroom. Today, it isn't.
Yeah.
They're digital natives. They live with tech. So in fact, to break them out of tech, to break them and to bring them into a alternative universe where tech does not exist, but you can actually I mean, how will you build EQ if you're going to focus so much on screen and not actually collaborate and team build with, your peers in your classroom?
Yeah.
Reading, when was the last time you picked up a book? And so I think some of the old school teaching, it's a bit contrarian. I think a lot of parents would probably be aghast if there was a class without tech, but
Yeah.
perhaps there's merit in that too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's really powerful, even for us as we go through inspirED, to really say, are we being swept by the notions and the world around us, or are we really sort of stopping to say what really matters for children? What do we want to retain that has worked in the past, and what do we want to innovate and change moving forward? So with that backdrop of the world-class education that we're all working towards, unfiltered, Roshni, where is India today? If you were to describe the state of the system as broadly as you can, especially thinking about children coming out of almost 2 years of school closures with the pandemic, where are we today as a nation?
I worry, to be honest, Shaheen, and the only reason I do is because I think the past 2 years, perhaps urban schools have fared much better than their rural counterpart. But by faring better, I mean digital has allowed for better connectivity. But however, I still go back to the original point. That's helped in the strengthening of the IQ. So that's helped kids, let's say, learn coding, or basically drive up the skills value chain. But leaders, whether 100 years ago or even as we see today or tomorrow, they are not leaders because they're similar in IQ to perhaps a lot more people in their class. What makes them different is their maturity and evolution of their EQ. So for me, I think I am worried because 2 years of COVID has given tailwinds to perhaps digital literacy, or whatever, the digital revolution in education, that perhaps improves accessibility, but the real learning is not exactly what happens in screens. It's a bit like, when we were in school, they used to say the real learning happens actually outside the classroom. So even today, you would have to say the real learning is what happens outside the screen. So it's exactly the same concept. So I think that today we need to get all our kids back into school. So I think 2 years of lull period, schools have opened, but cases happen, cases don't happen, but we have to find a way to have kids in school on a regular basis. And we have to, you probably know a lot more about the curriculum than I do, and the curriculum changes which are coming. But I don't know how much of it is focusing on, again, just developing the IQ, or is there something which is also looking at the EQ?
Yeah, it's such a big question as we move, and I think it's an irreversible trend to embrace technology in education. Is there a way that technology can actually help build EQ, or is it going to continue down the route which we've seen it predominantly beyond so far, which is really to foster academic gains and IQ? I think it's a beautiful question. If I were to push on the other side and ask you, did you see opportunities come out of the pandemic? And as an educator, were there some aha, insightful moments for you in terms of how you thought about education that you will take forward now that schools have reopened?
Well, I think the aha moment for all of us would have been how beautifully the hybrid model worked, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the students, and not just students, actually, I have to say, Shaheen, even the educators, how quickly they took to pivoting to the digital model, and how quickly they took to delivering wherever they could quality education, in the hybrid model. So, and for some students, who tend to be a little more reserved, maybe it helped them come forward
Yeah.
because they were behind, the screen, so to speak. So there were some aha moments that could the hybrid model actually be a much more sustainable model going forward. But again, the operator word is hybrid, which means there is some physical aspect to education that has to still remain. But I was amazed at how quickly students and educators pivoted and how quickly they this new way of learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a big question for us to hold as schools have reopened. Have we forgotten the benefits already of that hybrid? Because it is a not easy thing to implement at scale. When you talk about blended learning, you're really saying, as you said, how can you learn beyond the classroom, but also how can you enable technology within a classroom? Because there are certain things that are better done in person, and there are certain things potentially that are better done using technology. And that involves one infrastructure for all children, where we know like 60-70% of our kids today don't have that digital infrastructure, but it also involves retraining teachers to embrace a new blended model. So again, I think a big thing for us to think about this week and beyond at inspirED. Roshni, learning outcomes, I think probably the most often discussed topic in education across India, just are still abysmally low learning outcomes. When you look at most children in the country, 70% of our kids are falling behind by grade 3, 50% broadly, are not able to read by grade 5. When you think about a problem like that, what can we collectively do to shift not just foundational outcomes, but holistic outcomes for children? Like if we really have that bar, going back to the first question, of a world-class education, and we believe that every child deserves that education, what do we collectively as a nation need to do to come together and solve that?
Shaheen, my kids are quite young. So my older one's 9 and my younger one's 6. And the one thing, I don't know if you feel this, but I actually feel that education, even at a very nascent stage, the learning outcomes and the education is actually quite complicated. It's not simple.
Yeah.
So are we, it's not that are we putting more pressure, but are we making the learning outcome itself a little too complicated? So if you were to just focus on, let's say, literacy and numeracy, are you connecting learning outcomes to grades and marks and performance, or to life skills? And the truth is, as adults today, there's a lot that I was measured on learning outcomes through school and university. But today, as an adult, I can say there were only about less than a handful that today help me as a life skill. So is there a connection being made between learning outcomes of schools and what he or she or whoever will need as a life skill when they are an adult? Yeah. And is there a synergy between the two? Because at the moment there isn't. I think that I actually think that's, I don't know if you feel this, but I sometimes feel students have too much. They're being measured on too many platforms, and however, only less than a handful of those are actually relevant for life. So where is that connect?
Yeah, I think that's such a powerful and beautiful thought. I'm thinking of how different our actions would be if every day as teachers, we were asking, like, is what I'm teaching, like, does it matter for life? And if it doesn't matter, let me get rid of it and focus on what actually does matter. And I wonder what we would end up teaching and how that would be different from what we currently teach. So I think that's really powerful. The other thought I often have is, why are we not asking our children what they really need to learn? And so with that thought, my next question is, have you seen, I mean, you have young children yourself, I'm curious, even with your own kids, but certainly with the kids that you serve in the schools that you run, have you seen a role that students can play in driving their own learning and the learning of others? I think the traditional paradigm is that we're the experts, we're adults, we know what is right. And we know why you need to learn, we know what you need to learn. And by the way, kids, we know how you need to learn as well. We've sort of removed voice and agency from our children. The question is, like, is there another way? Like, is there a role for kids as partners in this work?
Absolutely. So, Shaheen, even for the Vidya Gyan schools that I run, today, after having been in existence for 10, 11 years, now we finally have a group of alumni who are out in the world, who've gone through their full education cycle. So they've gone through school as well as university or college, and now they are either at a job or they are looking for a job. And today, when we run, a survey with them, I think a lot of what I mentioned with, the whole world-class education, some of this input actually came from them, which was like, in 6, 7, 8, did I really need to do CBSE? I understand I have to do it in 10, 11, 12 because there's some, measures of grades or whatever, and I need to get into a college. Okay, so that's fine. But in my middle school or my really, primary years of learning, did I need to do this? So it's coming from an alumni which has just recently been through the journey, actually questioning of that, is it necessary? So again, Shaheen, it goes back to that question, which I'm thinking to myself, in a school where I can control the outcomes, at least till they get to a national testing, does it have to be related to curriculum, or does it have to be related to the life skills? Today, a lot of students have living in a world where which is highly competitive to the point of combative. A lot of it is actually lived not even in real time, but it's lived on social media time. It's lived in a really it's something even different than a meta or verse or whatever. They're dealing with issues that you and I can't fathom because we didn't grow up in that world. The context has changed. The context has changed, but the education has not changed.
Yeah.
So the world, so to me, some of the questions and the education that students can give us is, what is my context?
Yeah.
You are teaching me ka, kha, gha, gha, for example, but my context is, I'm not able to survive in this particular situation. And how do I navigate that situation? So I think that where students really can help us is help define the context and the world that they're growing up in.
Yeah.
But it's actually a world that we are growing old in.
Yeah.
Old in. They're growing up in. It's a very big difference
between
the two. So it's a bit like looking at our grandparents, right? Our grandparents, I mean, not that we're grandparents, but even our older parents, they lived in a generation where technology was coming to them, but they weren't owning it. It was just kind of part of their life. We were growing up where, you had the Nokia cell phone, then you had the iPhone, and then, whatever. So we really owned it. So they've kind of grown old in that world. Even today, you'll have your parents look at the phone and say, oh, how do I send this text message? Or do I get on social media, whatever? They haven't owned it. We've lived it.
Yeah.
So I think it's a world we're growing old in. It's a world they're growing up in.
Yeah.
So they can give us context. We don't know it. We don't know it from their perspective.
Yeah, such a beautiful idea to remember the growing old and the growing up. Roshni, I think we just have one more minute, but I want to fit my last question in for you. As someone talking to an audience, what's the most important thing for everyone to keep in mind as they think about something they can do for children's learning? What would you really want them to keep in mind?
Again, I think, Shaheen, this goes back to what I said before, because I'm experiencing it firsthand, is the whole aspect around personal development and emotional development.
Yes.
So I think that we'll manage to make them bright. We'll manage to make them get good marks. I think that's something that we've managed to do. But getting the social capital right for students is absolutely critical, which perhaps requires us as educators to get trained in or understand human behavior much more, and look at the student from that lens, is going to be critical. It was critical before as well, but today, because there's this digital wall which has come between people, by way of cell phones or online or hybrid or whatever, it's becoming that much more harder to permeate. So we have to be mindful of that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Roshni. So much wisdom in your words, and good luck with all your beautiful work. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much, Shaheen and Roshni, for sharing such fantastic insights with us. Something that stood out to me is the importance of EQ in education, the role that digital access has played in the past 2 years, and how we can make sure that learning in schools is applicable and connected to a person's entire life. We'll now move to our next session, a panel discussion on redefining schooling. To facilitate this discussion, we have with us the phenomenal Shireen Bhan. Shireen is the managing director of CNBC TV 18, with over 20 years of experience in the field of television broadcast, tracking corporate and policy news and events that defined the business landscape in India. For more than a decade now, Shireen has not only been producing and anchoring flagship award-winning shows like India Business Hour and Young Turks, she has also been hands-on in guiding and molding young business journalists. A very, very warm welcome, Shireen. And joining her in the panel, we have Kiran Sethi, founder and director of the Riverside School, Alisa Chatterjee, a grade 7 Riverside School student, Sandhya Gupta, founder of Avishkar, and Kanika Narula, center head of Pehchan, the street school from Delhi. Welcome, everyone, and over to you, Shireen.
Hello and welcome to this very special conversation, which is part of inspirED 2022. I'm Shireen Bhan, and it gives me a great pleasure to talk about an issue that I'm passionate about personally, and something that we have been championing here on CNBC TV 18, the channel that I work for. And it's wonderful to be able to have a conversation about how we can actually reimagine, redefine schooling in a post-COVID world. It's been a very, very difficult last 2 years. In fact, schools have been perhaps the biggest casualties of the pandemic, because while the economy started to reopen, restaurants, movie theaters, gyms, bars, what have you, started to reopen. Schools were the last to, in fact, reopen. But I'm glad that we now do have kids back in school and kids back in the classroom. While it has taught us many important lessons on leveraging technology, on what a hybrid classroom could look like, how technology can actually aid and enable educators and teachers, it has also highlighted several important issues. Of course, it's brought to fore the digital divide, which I think to a large part has been glossed over. through the course of the pandemic, because we didn't really have much of a choice. And I don't think that this was an issue that was prioritized significantly. But more importantly, it also gives us the opportunity to reimagine and reshape what the classrooms of the future need to be, where we stand as far as supply is concerned of educators, of teachers in India, how we can in fact use new policy interventions, use the new education policy that the government has put forward, or the many new initiatives that the government has decided to take forward on digital education. How can all of that come together to ensure that we have a much more robust education system going forward? So let me introduce our panel here, because they are the experts. They're going to be telling us what needs to be done, and more importantly, how it can be done. A wonderful set of people here with us today. Kiran B. Sethi, a designer and educationist. She runs the Riverside School in Ahmedabad. Kiran, thanks very much for joining us here on this very special conversation. Also with us, Sandhya Gupta, the founder of Avishkar, which is a center for science, math, arts, and technology. Also someone who's passionate about education. Kanika Nerula of Pehchan, which is the street school in Delhi. She is working as the center head of one of the Pehchan centers in Delhi. And of course, the star of our panel today is Alisa Chatterjee, a grade 7 student who joins us to take us through her experience of what it was like to be out of school, being homeschooled virtually, and now being back in class. So thank you very much for joining us today. You know, I was going over and there has been a lot of research that's been done on the impact of the pandemic on education. And I was going over a KPMG CII report, which was put together in October of 2021 on the impact of COVID on education, as well as charting out the road to recovery. And if I could just sort of summarize what to my mind are the highlights, and then you can add to what you think needs to be done. One, of course, is the fact that this was a global disruption for education. It wasn't just an India-specific challenge or an India-specific problem. What we have seen is the education system globally being challenged. So are there lessons to be learned from what other countries have been able to do? Is there a global playbook that one can learn from and swap stories, engage, and do things better on? The other crucial issue is what happens to the kids who've already dropped out, and are we starting to see them return to school now that schools have started to reopen? What can be done to ensure that we don't actually see more kids dropping out? Can technology be used to ensure that absenteeism is brought down, that enrollments are encouraged? I think that's going to be something to watch for the future as well. Then, of course, the entire aspect of the loss of learning, and more importantly, also the decline in well-being, which again is something that we haven't spoken about, we haven't addressed. How can that be part of the conversation going forward? Addressing the digital divide, which is a real divide and a real challenge, and we saw that through the course of the pandemic. How do we ensure that we better that? The role of educators and teachers, and how do you reimagine it? Can it be reconfigured? In what way can it be reconfigured, especially using technology? I think that's going to be something crucial as well. What do we do to ensure the sustainability of low-cost private education, of private schools, which have also borne the brunt of the pandemic, with kids dropping out, schools being closed, parents not being able to pay their fee, and so on and so forth? The use of technology, whether it's the Prime Minister's e-Vidya scheme, or it is other programs that the government has decided to launch, including in the budget this year, the focus on digital education, digital university, digital schooling. How can you ensure that all of this is a robust model for the future? And eventually, how do we ensure that we build resilience into the school system to be able to withstand the shocks that we just saw, the kind of shock that we saw on account of the pandemic? So I thought those were, to my mind, some of the issues that we could address here on this panel as we discuss the road ahead. But Kiran, let me start by asking you, 2 years, schools being shut, kids being homeschooled, digital classrooms, and so on and so forth. What, to your mind, has been the biggest impact, the biggest casualty of the pandemic on education?
When we when we went online and there was a sudden kind of shift, I think to my mind, I have to say I was very glad that the pandemic highlighted the dysfunctional system. All right. The social distancing that we kept talking about, I have to say that even before the pandemic, there was much social distancing happening in classrooms. Okay, whilst even I might be physically present, I was not engaging with the child at all, across the board. So it just kind of, I think for me, brought the focus back on empathy and well-being. This is not rocket science yet. And we all knew that if you feel good, you will file information better. There's enough data and research to kind of highlight this. But for some reason, it takes collective will to do what is right and to do it right now. And I think if the pandemic did one thing across the board, was to highlight the need for the heart to start everything. I mean, it has to be. There is no other way. And if we are not going to listen to that, all this learning loss is just going to be something we will talk about, flush it under in the toilet, but it'll always be something we're not willing to push for. So I would feel if we are going to learn anything, it has to be heart. It has to start from there. Everything will finally, that'll be the locus. That'll be the center of everything. And I'm hoping moving forward, the pandemic is just going to push us into that direction. And I'm now going to just make a call on this digital stuff, right? Okay, we got the digital. Not a fan, I have to say. I want to be in front and I want to have three-dimensional people and I want to hug a child and all of that. So whilst the digital we can learn about things by ourselves, we can only learn about ourselves with each other. I think that's another thing that was highlighted. So I would say, if I would just to summarize everything from COVID, it has to be the heart. We have to start there. Everything else will follow from there. So if we are really looking at the North Star, it has to be the heart. It has to be the well-being of children as the North Star. Everything else has to be around this particular sort of direction. And then you'll find everything will fall into place. So
yes, it has to be the well-being of children that must drive policy, that must drive future interventions. And you're absolutely right. But the point that you made about the collective will, and Sandhya, let me bring you into the conversation. If there is now collective will, there is collaboration between educators, teachers, parents as well. And parents, played a very, very important role in just being able to manage with education over the last 2 years, digital and otherwise. But what do you believe is the need of the hour in light of the lessons learned, but more importantly, what we want our classrooms to be? How do we shape the classrooms of the future? Where should this collective will and all of these stakeholders take us to?
So, when pandemic happens and school shut down, I kind of felt a relief for the children. Because what we do in schools is basically memorization. We don't teach for understanding. So, and we teach for passing the exam, that is marks. It does not mean that they have learned. So in a way, I felt, well, it did not happen for everybody, but I still felt that now the parent and the child are actually spending time together and getting to know each other better. They are understanding the challenges, and the students hopefully have now this less pages to fill through homework, which I thought was a very good thing. And I thought this is a very good time to build the capacity of the system through our teachers or our principals or whoever is working in the system. what we need in our system is to teach, as I'm saying again and again, to teach for understanding, which is currently absolutely not happening. I mean, I have one young lady who works with us. She loves mathematics. And she realized after a bachelor's that she can't really go into master's because what she has learned is a procedure. But she can't use her creativity to actually create new things in mathematics. So this is something that is fundamental that has to change. We knew it before the pandemic, but after the pandemic, it has become all the more the need of the hour to shift the gear and start teaching for understanding, creating problems where the students get into, immerse themselves and understand, rather than keep doing the same thing again and again and again. This is our chance. This 2 years was our chance. And now that we are reimagining, let's go to the classroom with a different lens, is what I would say.
I hope that we use this different lens. But Kanika, how confident or optimistic do you feel, to the point that was being made there by Sandhya and by Kiran as well, on immersive learning, on experiential learning, on not going back down this memorization road and the rote route. Do you believe that we are going to see a change, or is it going to be more of the same? Because very often we do, people think that big changes, big shifts will lead to transformation, but very often you tend to slip back into old habits. Do you really believe that we are likely to see changes?
So Shireen, I agree with Sandhya because I work for underprivileged students. So there are no such resources which normal children is having in their school, like textbooks, good games, devices, and internet. So we actually teach them with these things as well, using flashcards and using different things which they see all around them. So I think, and because government has also introduced 21st century skill nowadays, so this is again a new method for experiential learning, in which we are teaching students the motor skills, the creative skills, and we are using different techniques to inculcate those skills in the students. So I agree we should go ahead with these approaches, because we should be prepared for this type of pandemics in the future. If in case this happens, then what will be our approach in handling the situation? Because today, if I talk about the underprivileged students and the students starting from class nursery to fourth, so this is the category of the students who are really impacted. And you can also see that these are the classes which actually are the base of the school students. So if they are getting impacted, definitely if they are getting promoted to another classes, even if government has passed this rule, we will not be failing the students up to 8th standard. So this is not a solution, because definitely they need to be admitted into the colleges and giving entrances. In that, definitely they will be impacted in that stream only. Yes.
Yes, so we need to ensure that our learning is more experiential, it's more immersive, that we equip students and children with tools that they can use, not just when we talk about employability or employment, but life skills. And I think that's important as well. Let me get Alisa into the conversation. Alisa is a grade 7 student. Alisa, let me start by asking you, what was the experience like over the last 18 months when you were not in school but you were being homeschooled? Did you enjoy that? Are you now relieved to be back in school? Take me through how you felt.
So I'm definitely relieved to be back in school, because online school wasn't bad, but it still wasn't a great experience. I mean, I definitely prefer offline school, because I get to meet my friends, I get to hug them. I really miss that when I was offline. And I don't know, offline sort of made me a little depressed and always worried about getting specs. Sorry.
That is a very real fear and a very real concern, because you're spending so much time on screen. I can understand where you're coming from. But Elisa, you said something very interesting there, and I think again that's something that we haven't recognized enough. You said that you felt depressed. What was that like? How did that make you feel? And did you talk to your teachers about it? Did you talk to your mom and dad about it? Did you talk to your friends about it? Were your friends feeling like that as well? What was that feeling that you went through?
So honestly, I don't think I've ever felt like that before, because I'm usually always a happy child. But like, and I'm also very social. So I love being around people, and I need someone to be there. I need to play. I need to be with someone, and like that didn't happen much in offline. I mean, yeah, offline school, and I just missed physical activities so much. So yeah.
Well, I completely understand that it is hard not to be able to see your friends, not to be able to go outside, to be stuck in a room, and more importantly, be stuck, looking at the world through a screen all the time. But if now that you're listening into the conversation, Elisa, and everyone's talking about how schools need to be different, how classrooms need to be different, if I were to ask you, what is it that you would like for your classroom? In what way would you like school to be different? Your learning in class, how would you like your classroom to be different?
So for other schools, I think they should all be like Riverside, where every student's voice is heard, and they get to choose what they want to. So we have this thing called agenda setting every morning, where we get to decide what we want to do in the day. The teachers hear our voice, and we get to decide everything we want to do. So I'm pretty sure that is something not every school does. And I really think it is something that other schools should do. So even the children are happy, everybody's happy. So.
Well, more power to you. And Kiran, let me come to that. I mean, how do you institutionalize giving children a voice, giving children agency? Because the way that we have learned to operate, and perhaps more so in cultures like ours, where it is sort of command and control. It's either the parents telling you what to do, or it's teachers telling you what to do. It's never asking the child what the child wants to do, or what the child wishes his or her life should look like. How have you been able to institutionalize this in your classrooms? And when you're dealing with classrooms which have 40, 50 children, how do you make that work? How do you make that happen?
Yeah. I'll tell you some things that happen in certain cultures, and I think our Southeast Asian cultures, we have confused obedience for respect. And then therein lies the problem, right? We think if you're obedient, you're respectful. Obedience is an act of power, right? It's an act of hierarchy. It's an act of power, and it is basically it's a distance that happens. It's a passive idea. So children are meant to be obedient. It's confused for respect, and therefore compliance is rewarded, right? Everybody's quiet and good, and then it's rewarded. Respect is a very active verb. It asks of you to listen. It asks of you to lean in. It asks of you to trust the other's voice. And I have to say, once you respect that, the idea of agency is born out of that trust, that fundamental trust in another human being. Age has nothing to do with it. Age has nothing to do with it. Gender has nothing to do with it. Demographics has nothing to do with it. It's the foundational act of respect that you give to another human being. And then I find we often mimic what we see, and we often teach as how we've been taught. And we've only been taught that the compliance is good, conversation is bad, monologues and instructions are good, invitation to have a conversation is not considered important. So to shift that is a mindset. It asks you to invite and not instruct. And that means you listen more than tell. It's not impossible, neither is it it's something that cannot be done. It just requires the shift in the mind of the pedagogical approach, that in that space we will start with listening and respecting. And often it's difficult because the teacher says, I have to teach you, or I have to also smile at you. You decide. Quadratic equation mein karna hai. Ye nahi ho sakta. So then we've gotten okay with the either or model. Either I can teach you content or build character. And the both and that is required to build the whole self gets diluted. So I think what we've done at Riverside is institutionalize it, because we've kind of codified all the processes. We've kind of made it part of the systems approach to building a culture where voice and choice are part of respect and that co-creation. So that's really what we've done so far, and we're basically working with other schools to support this codification and this culture. It's not impossible, but yes, it takes belief. Yeah.
Absolutely, and you do deserve applause for that. And we can see Alisa, and I can see she's not afraid to be heard. She's not afraid to be seen. And more power to you and your team for encouraging young girls like her to live their authentic selves, to be themselves. But Satya, on the codification that Kiran was speaking of, and changing the narrative and shifting the mindset within the classroom, the move towards more holistic teaching, a more holistic education. We talk about life skills, entrepreneurship, and these are skills that children are often taught by the time they're not even in high school, but perhaps doing their graduation or even post that. How do you ensure that you make education a lot more holistic, given the environment that we live in today, and especially given the opportunity, as you pointed out, that COVID has left us with, to be able to reshape the way we see education?
So I will talk about Avishkar and how we do it here. So we are mostly focused on science and math education. We work on element of engineering through our design, problem-solving design challenges. We do some technology, and art is also a component of it. But suppose it is a mathematics classroom, and so mathematics is about mathematics is a language. It is about logic. It is about reason. But right now, it is in our classroom. It is about procedure. So if we come up with a beautiful problem in the classroom, which is my homework as a teacher, and we give it to the students and let them explore it, figure out on their own how they are going to solve it, the problem needs to be authentic. That's something that is connected to their daily life and they are solving. So if you leave it to groups, and this is the faith we have to have in them, that they would be able to solve it. And even if they are not able to solve it, the process is more important than the result, right? And when they indulge in it and they start exploring, you realize that each student, each group solves a problem differently.
Yeah.
And when they come out with the answer or not come out with the answer, we learn, okay, a problem can be approached in different ways. And so this is what we need to develop in our students. This is how we are developing the brain muscle. I mean, 24 plus 23 is equal to 47 is not developing the brain muscle. But how did they do this addition is what is developing the brain muscle. So we as teachers have to pose more problems like this so that they can work together in team, they can come up with a solution, they can explain their process, and they can see when different groups explain their results, they are able to reflect and see the beauty of the process of somebody else. And that is how we would be able to create this holistic learning.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I don't know about math being a language, because clearly it was not a language that I understood while I was in school, and maybe it was because it was so driven by procedure. But I completely appreciate that, and I think it just drives people into a sense of fear where you didn't just stop wanting to deal with that any longer. And I appreciate what you're saying there. But Kanika, let me get you to tell us. What to your mind will work, especially in a situation where you're dealing with children who are not perhaps digitally savvy, or don't have the parental supervision or access to tutors and things like that? I mean, how do you ensure that they get quality education, that they get quality life skills as well. What has worked to your mind in your classroom?
Okay, so let me take an example from Pehchan itself. So we work for slum children. So they have like sometimes they have only one device, one smartphone at their home, and sometimes they're not having the internet connection as well. So when the pandemic was going on, so what we conducted is we started a initiative called Digital Pehchan, in which we, because students are standard students from standard 10 to 12, they are on Facebook, they're on different, they are following the YouTube channel. So we actually posted our recorded sessions and as well as live sessions on Digital Pehchan as well as the YouTube channels, so that they can easily access those things. And we are teaching their like elementary education and normal generic topics that we can cover maximum students of all the standards and of all the classes. And secondly, what we did in Pehchan during the pandemic time is we conducted the group classes, in which we have assigned each volunteer to a group of 4 5 students. They join on video calls on the basis of their convenience whenever the device and internet is available with them. So so we ask our volunteers to conduct those classes on their weekdays, so at least they should not feel like, because their culture is very different, the environment in which they are living is there in that environment education is not much important. Because I have seen many students there, they are pulled into shops, they are pulled into their household chores, especially girls, because I work for a community where there is a lot of girls who are in 10th standard are being pulled into household chores. But because we are having our classes, so that's why at least for an hour, for 2 hours, they are actually dedicating their time into their studying. At least we will have a hope that at least they will not be out of touch with their studies. And the third thing we have implemented is we have started sending their pre-recorded sessions of our volunteers on their WhatsApp group, so that at least they can see whenever they get internet connection. So that's how we implemented our education strategies during the pandemic time.
Yeah, and that's an important point. Let me get Alisa to talk about that. Alisa, we're talking about digital classrooms, and for 2 years, you only had a digital classroom that you could go to. But now that classes have reopened, schools have reopened, you're back in school. How is it that you think technology can help? Do you what do you use technology for? I mean, do you go back and look at a YouTube video to understand things that you may have learned in school better? How do you use technology to help you understand and learn better?
So it's not only for like helping us while we're doing our homework, and like if we didn't understand something, if we missed a class, usually that's what we do. We refer to a YouTube video or something like that. So, and also it's we use technology nowadays for a lot of things. So every year we in Riverside we make a portfolio, which is what we're currently doing right now. And this year we're doing it online, so it makes it a lot easier to make our portfolio, and we can edit it, and we won't have to make thousands of drafts. We can just edit the same thing. And yeah.
All papers and tactics.
That's good. That's good. Your full marks for being sustainable as well. But you said that it's not just about what you're doing in class, etc. You're also learning about the world. Perhaps you're learning about things that interest you. Take me through how you have used technology in the last 2 years. Not just about doing your classwork or your assignments, but how do you use technology otherwise? What do you use it for?
For entertainment is obviously one.
For entertainment.
Yeah, keeping in touch with our friends. So, and also general knowledge, like really helps with YouTube and stuff really helps with our general knowledge, because obviously there's news and stuff over there too. So we can just look at that and learn about the stuff that is going on around the world. For example, right now, Ukraine and Russia, their war. So you know more stuff about the world, and yeah. So things we don't learn in school, we can learn through social media.
Do you also have like Insta and all of that? Do you?
No, not yet, because I'm too young.
Not yet. She's not old enough yet. But would you like to be on Instagram or Facebook when you're eligible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's basically do you feel like that um, putting yourself out there in public, posting things about your life, etc., do you feel that that gives you confidence, or do you believe that that also makes you conscious of being a certain way or not being a certain way?
I think a little bit of both. Because yeah, obviously if you look at other people on social media, especially, like we have filters and all that stuff nowadays, so everybody seems to
I can see you're using a cool one right now.
yeah,
What did you say?
yeah. So everybody else's life seems to look super cool, but then you also have that good feeling of showing off a little bit on social media. So yeah.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a little bit of that as well. But Kiran, to the point, like you said that, of course, you're not a big believer in digital classrooms. But how do we ensure that we can, in fact, leverage technology to aid, to facilitate, to embellish, what you are being able to do in classrooms? How do you make good use of it?
I have to say that technology has kind of disrupted time. I mean, it allows you to completely reimagine time, right? So the fact that we could have classes late in the evening, with people across the world, it suddenly brought a huge new opportunity to look at time and look at opportunities, which is basically networking from across the world. It's ironical, even though logically thought that, yes, we must invite the world into the classroom. When we were pre-pandemic, it would often be within the realm of the city or, the people you knew. But I think this just completely opened up the avenues of what does it take to bring the world really into the classroom. So I think for us, we were really excited about that. I think in many ways to publish and author material, that was super exciting, to be able to really use technology as a way to aid your storytelling. For me, I can't see a better way to do it than using technology for that. Like Elisa said, to be in touch with the world at a glimpse you're there, but also brought in the need to curate, to understand what is fact over fiction. How do you measure that? How do you understand what you're hearing is actually real? Because we suddenly had WhatsApp University going through the roof. How do you get children to start getting the new skills? So I think technology introduced this really, really important skill of curation of information. How do you start filtering? So while there are filters for the face, there's a filter for the mind as well that needs to that I don't think was activated enough. So I think the real skill of filtering the mind and understanding what information you filter in would be is something that technology kind of enhanced and highlighted. That's the need.
Absolutely, and that's also part of what the job of the media should be: accurate curation. And I hope that the media does its bit and takes forward what it's responsible for. But Sunday, I want to come back to you now, because we spoke about capacity building, and let's shift the spotlight to what needs to happen as far as educators and teachers are concerned, because Kiran was also talking about that mindset shift and moving from instruction to listening. How do you ensure that you actually move to that kind of a classroom? What do you need to do to ensure that the workforce, the pipeline of educators, makes that shift, makes that change, and how realistic is that today?
So I could talk more about how we did it and what we did. So during the pandemic, schools were closed, but communities were not, organizations were not. So there are about 15 grassroots organizations across the country. We started working with their community educators. So we started conducting a year-long program. We met with them once or twice per week for a couple of hours. We worked with them so that they can work with the children in their immediate community. So what this did was, this kept the learning going for the kids of the community. These teachers, some of them may have taught, some of them had never taught. But through this program, and so they learned about teaching through us. And the only way we know is experiential. making it visual, making it contextual, making it relevant, making it connected to the community. So that we kept doing a lot. And now, after the pandemic, as things are opening, I see that what we need is like a hybrid model, because because coming face to face is expensive, especially when you are doing teachers training. So this hybrid model helps me connected the teacher on a weekly basis and meeting with them maybe twice a year or something like that, so that we can do a deeper engagement. And because in this case, now they are with the students every day and they are with us every week, we get to hear back as to what we worked on. How did it go out in class? Did it work? Is it the change that's needed to be made? And the mindset shift that we talk about, because of this consistent engagement, this shift is possible. And this is, I think, a big, before pandemic, I didn't even think of online. As Kiran was saying, I was very focused on this in-person engagement. I even don't like the word offline. Online is more important. So I like to call it online and in-person. So for me, in-person was very important. But this pandemic showed us the importance of a hybrid model. Because when you're going online, your content has to be polished and ready. There is no scope for making mistakes, because your time is fixed, your presentation is, what you're going to talk about is kind of fixed, so that you can be effective. There is no tea break in the middle where you can meet your participants. So I think that has really helped us polish things and moved us towards what we see as a better teacher training program.
Well, yes, I think hybrid is the way to go. And I also appreciate not using offline, because somehow it almost makes you feel like you're disconnected, you're not connected. And I think in person is a much better articulation of how we want to portray that. But Kanika, let me ask you, we were talking about one aspect, which is getting kids to get into school. So the focus has been on enrollment, and there have been many policy measures, many interventions, both at the central government level and state government level for years now, including the midday meal programs, etc. And also ensuring that kids stay on and don't drop out. So in light of what we've seen with the pandemic, have you been able to bring kids back into school? And what do you believe needs to be done at a policy level to ensure that we stem the dropout rates as well, not just bring them in, but also keep them in?
So what I think is, because I work for an underprivileged community, so there I have seen many cases, especially girls who have dropped out from their school because now they are involved either with their like household business or household course.
Yeah.
So what we have done in our area is start meeting with the parents and just connected with them and figuring out what was the reason why they dropped out, because of corona thing or any major reason. So we worked on those reasons, and we also encourage them to get them admitted back to their school. And few parents are get convinced, and they are again going sending their students back to the school. And second thing, what we can do is even we can set up one meetup, because they study in MCD and NDMC school. So in the previous year, when everything was normal, so some of the teachers visited that community. So in this time also, I also request the teachers and the school authorities who can visit this type of community and can show the importance of education and the importance of their children life, or you can say a career to them, so that they can also, because I am from a community, not from a school, but a school teacher is coming and visiting the community. That actually helps, because students can easily connect with them rather than connecting with me, because they are meeting with me on every weekends, but on each day and every day they're meeting their teachers. So maybe their teachers and school authorities can better convince them, and definitely we can support them in bringing those students back to the school.
Yeah, I think it will have to be a collaborative effort, a partnership of all stakeholders to try and ensure that kids who may have dropped out through the course of the pandemic are brought back into the classroom and then, in fact, stay on. But Kiran, I want to address that issue with you as well. At a policy level, what are the kind of interventions that you think the government needs to focus on? I mean, for instance, we've just seen, one of the state governments, the Tamil Nadu state government, put out its state budget where they are now talking about 1,000 rupee per month for all government school educated girls who are pursuing higher education. What do you believe can be the policy interventions that are relevant in today's context to ensure that we do get kids back in class and staying on in class?
Yeah, I think the midday meal was an outstanding sort of intervention. I can't think of another bolder, more inclusive way to make sure that children come to school, at least for that whole idea, the food for their just a sustenance. And then I think incentivizing girl child, to finish X number of years, providing scholarships for higher ed. I mean, there's so many smaller sort of experiments that are being done across. I think what we have to kind of identify, codify, and amplify those kind of initiatives that can then be taken to scale. Because it's only the government that can do to scale, right? Well, all the NGOs of the world can bring in their interventions. It's the government that can say we're running this statewide. And I keep talking about collective will. I keep coming back to that. None of this is rocket science. None of this is something we don't know. Why are we still struggling? Why are we still repairing education? It's because there is no collective will to move the needle. So I would say that if one were to find that collective will, identify these experiments that have worked really well and have worked for a period of time, I would also encourage that those ideas and models that have worked well should have worked for at least a decade. Otherwise, it's too new to be able to scale up. And I think with tech now being able to be an opportunity to take those models and scale it up would be, I think, a way to go. We did it with eVidya. Overnight, there was so much work that happened through radio and all of that to reach out, right? To continue the learning. I think the will to take those models, which are already showing great traction, and then to make sure that one can scale those, I don't think there's anything that can come in the way of reaching every child.
Well, that's absolutely right. If you want scale, and especially in a country like ours, it has to be backed by the government. It cannot be done by the private sector, and certainly cannot be done by the social sector. Even though we have interesting examples, but just to be able to build scale requires the machinery and the power of the center as well as the state governments. But Elisa, let me ask you, when you have a conversation with your friends and you talk about what you want from school, or what you would like to do when you are in school, how much would you change? I mean, you're lucky because you love going to your school and you enjoy what's happening there. But maybe kids, friends of yours who are not in your school, do you talk about what you would like? I mean, if you had a dream school, what would it include?
So honestly, there's not much I would change from Riverside. So I guess we do a lot of hands-on stuff, and I love doing hands-on stuff. For example, right now we're building a go-kart, like an actual one that we can just sit on and ride. So I would really like to do more of these kind of things, building more stuff, and like we learn so many new things and we don't even realize it. Only in the ending we realize, oh, I learned so much about circuits. And yeah, so yeah, more of that stuff. And for others, for my friends that are out of Riverside, so they have exams from like really early grades, like K2, senior KG, and really early grades. And it seems very stressful, but for us, this is my first year doing exams. We start doing exams from grade 7, which like is a little lesser stress. So that's a really good thing for Riverside. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you. I mean, there is no business putting children in kindergarten through exams. I mean, that is just the most awful,
No, and there are some
awful thing that you
schools
could do.
there are some schools that pride themselves on weekly tests. It becomes like a big thing. हमारे school में
Yeah,
weekly test
it's a
होता है.
stress test. It's a stress test. But Sandhya, Alisa's lucky. She gets to go to a school that empowers her, that nurtures what she wants to do, nurtures her aspiration, and nurtures her ability to be herself. But it wasn't like that for most of us, for many of us. Uh, given your experience of being in a classroom, if you were to change the way things are being done today, what is the one thing that you believe needs to be changed immediately?
I think what we get tested for is what we teach for, right? So I think if we started with assessment, we change the way we assess, then we would be teaching very differently.
Yeah.
So I will put my all my money there. If we started testing students for like Alicia was talking about making a go-kart.
Polio, yeah.
Yeah. So if this is what you're going to get tested on, how well do you work as a group? How can you find different technology to build this? And this is how you will be graded. Now, the way students would work, the way teacher would work would be totally different. And even students want that. Even educators, many educators would become continuous learners. So the whole system will change on its own if we check for understanding rather than for memorization.
Yeah, I agree. And let me, Kiran, get you to very quickly tell us, you talked about the codification. So the top 5 items that you've been able to codify and scale at Riverside that, that can sort of become the playbook for others as well.
Well, I would say the main things are the intangibles, right? What happens is cultures are built on shared behaviors, right? And values. Unfortunately, values people don't actually aren't able to codify. So what happens is you walk into a school, you love what you're doing, but it's so person-centric that if a person leaves, you might tend to have a little, dilution in the way the system can flourish and sustain. The codification of relationships. How do you forge that? It's design thinking. I mean, I'm a designer by education. So when you actually identify those pieces that can actually become a recipe, it's a simple recipe, right? The fact that I can do the Maharaja's recipe even today, I can alter some of the ingredients is because somebody took the pains to write up that recipe. And that's all we've done. We've basically been able to talk about relevance, rigor, and relationships. These 3. If you remove everything else, like what Sandhya says and what Kanika says, no, what is the relevance of why we learn? How do I make that codified? How do I walk in with the who and the why, not the what and the how? If one shifts that and starts with the who and the why, that will inform the what and the how. So that's one piece. Relationships. How do you build a relationship with yourself, with each other, with the space? Now that's the foundation of human and humane enterprise, right? And the third is rigor, but rigor out of purpose. What is purposeful rigor looking like? How do I want to look at excellence, not at just finishing a task? And all of these can actually become the foundation of any school system. Everything else is a bonus. But at the heart of it is this is the foundation. Is there relevance in the learning? Are the relationships being forged and that becomes the glue? And is purposeful rigor being encouraged? You take these 3, everything else is a subset of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it was Mark Twain who said, "Don't let your education come in the way of your learning." And I think that is exactly what we need to happen. This obsessive focus on exams and marks as opposed to actually learning. I think that shift has to happen, and hopefully, the pandemic will force people to reimagine, reassess, review, and change the way that we've been doing things. Alisa, I'm going to give you the final say. through the last 2 years, how much of your relationship with your parents has changed? Because so much of what we do in the classroom is about what we do with our teachers and what we do with our friends and classmates. And with the exception maybe of the parents getting involved with asking you how much of your homework is left and whether you finished your assignment and so on and so forth, I don't know whether there has been an active conversation between parents and kids about what's happening in their classrooms. Did that change through the pandemic? Were you having more of a conversation with your parents about what's happening in class, or what you would like to happen in class, or just what you learned and so on and so forth?
Yeah, I think it has been happening a little bit more. Also, because when it was online, the parents could sometimes come and see what we're doing in class. So even they got a little bit more interested in everything we're doing. So now, after every day, once I come home, my parents ask me anything new happened today, and I share it with them. And this almost never happened before COVID. Um,
Your dad is here, by the way, hearing all of this. You watch it.
So you feel like you're communicating more with your parents about what you actually did through the course of your day.
Yeah.
Great. Well, and now that you know more about circuits post your go-kart assignment, is that the direction you want to take, or do you want to continue to go down the design route?
Design.
Okay. Well, Alisa, we wish you the very best of luck, and thank you so much for speaking to us. Kiran, Kanika, and Sandhya, thank you very much. We do hope that we continue to have these conversations, and we continue to have a discussion and a debate on what needs to change. And we do hope that there is meaningful change, there is impactful change, and it's impactful because it has to happen at scale. But thank you so much for your time this evening, and thank you very much for joining us here on inspirED.
Thank you so much. Bye, Shuri. God bless.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Beautiful. Such a powerful message about the future of schooling. Thank you so much, Kiran, Alisa, Sandhya, and Kanika, for sharing your experiences with us, and Shireen for facilitating the panel impeccably. Something that I am taking back from the discussion is acknowledging that a hybrid teaching and learning model is here to stay and how schools can use it effectively. Something I'm also thinking about is to pause and truly deeply understand what will what will help our students thrive, and to choose love, empathy, and respect as the starting point towards that. Up next, we have the first episode of inspirED Chronicles, an initiative towards rebuilding the system, titled The School Unlocked Down. This episode highlights different schools and how they have ensured effective and safe school reopening for their students and other stakeholders. Join us on this virtual tour of schools in Mumbai and Delhi and view with us all that our stakeholders are doing to ensure sustainable rebuilding of the system. Let us begin.
Pandemic has done a great loss to each and everyone, for me also and for students also.
we were the first batch of teachers who taught students online completely. I think we're dealing with challenges that no other teachers had probably experienced in the past, and I think this gives us a very unique opportunity to learn, grow, and ensure that learning is happening in the best possible way for us and our students.
It was a lot of struggle because kids didn't have network connection in their area. Many of the kids have already shifted another place due to the loss of jobs to their parents, and also many of the kids have gone back to village actually. So they have actually stopped learning and they have gone to their place.
मेरा हमारे फैमिली में 1 से 2 फ़ोन है, तो मेरे बड़े भाई को हमेशा ज़्यादातर प्रॉब्लम हो रही है और क्लास का टाइमिंग सेम होता था 8 o'clock, तो फिर बहुत ज़्यादा प्रॉब्लम हो रही थी. आई गेट फोन आफ्टर 6 months.
Actually, I had laptop, I have phone, and I had every facility. But there were some network glitches and some problems, which make it challenging and hard to me to be in the online class.
First of all, what happened, frankly speaking, we were not so techno-savvy. During the lockdown, it teaches us even many things we have also learned as an educator. We have also learned.
स्कूल को मिस किया, फ्रेंड्स, टीचर्स एंड टीचर्स का पढ़ाना कि वो क्लासरूम में ब्लैक बोर्ड पे पढ़ाती हैं.
लेक्चर्स और विजिटिंग वॉशरूम के बहाने पूरे स्कूल में घूमना.
The places, the homes that our kids come from are really constricted, confined. Oftentimes we can hear noises, we can hear loud people talking loudly that almost all the time interrupt their learning, and there's only so much possible to be done in an online space. I mean, yes, we were teaching effectively, but I think the concepts of building community or understanding each other's perspectives, working with each other, those were missing.
When schools are open, so it's kind of a bliss for us.
Something which I missed about the schools were many things, like I miss my teachers, my mates, and discussions in the class.
First of all, there is a lot of excitement and renewed energy since the school has opened. I started my fellowship as a online only medium, and it was quite difficult to engage the kids and do the learning efficiently. But since kids are coming to the school, they feel more connected to me also, and now I think their learning has increased multifold and they are able to grasp the details.
मुझे सबसे अच्छी खुशी की बात है कि स्कूल खुल गए हैं, तो इनके लिए बेस्ट ऑप्शन वही है. घर बैठ के जो हम पढ़ाई करा सकते हैं वो नहीं है, लेकिन जिसे बच्चा टीचर से फेस टू फेस मिले तो वो बेहतर है.
आई एम वेरी एक्साइटेड क्योंकि हम 2 years बाद आ रहे हैं, तो हमें अपने स्कूल में आके बहुत अच्छा लग रहा है.
While teaching online and offline, the transition has been really a struggle. So apart from a teacher, we really have to be a mentor. We have to be a friend to the kids so that they also feel safe and comfortable.
I think, if I see my time, I never thought that mental health can be the prime issue. But after pandemic, we have to focus on mental health.
When your parents are struggling, when there's a lot of financial difficulty around you, the natural instinct is how can we get more money or income into the family, and education being been the last priority for many of the homes that the students come from. It is natural to pull them out of school and engage them in some form of labor. So I think to make education exciting, to make it something that's going to change their future, pull them out of poverty not just for say a month or two, but in the long run was essential.
Due to the COVID, like kids have been missing like 2 years whole education. So like when we joined for the fellowship, we had to start from the zero actually. So like kids even forgot the basic addition, basic subtraction, basic operation. They were not able to do. They were not able to read. They were not able to write. So we had to start from the like zero from okay. COVID has actually impacted very much in the lower community actually. So like for the higher community, like they get good chances to come back, but for the lower community, it was a lot of pain they are suffering. They're still suffering because of the COVID.
I feel since the pandemic, we have lost more children to child abuse and just child labor. We do not even have track of these kids who have gone back to their villages. So as the waves of COVID kind of hit us, with every wave I think we got stronger and more informed. Now that they were coming back to school, we were also receiving from our own studies and studies across the world about learning poverty and how much time and effort would be required in order to bridge that gap.
पहले हम आते थे विदाउट मास्क के, अब मास्क ला के आना पड़ता है, सैनिटाइजर लेके आते हैं, हैंड वॉश करते हैं उसके बाद.
I think it's safe because of हमारी क्लास के लड़कियों में ज़्यादातर ने वैक्सीन ले चुका है और ज़्यादा क्लास हम सभी मास्क लगा के बैठते हैं क्लास में एंड हम सैनिटाइजर यूज़ करते हैं. आई थिंक इट्स सेफ फॉर अस.
तो हम क्लास में पहले सफाई करते हैं, झाड़ू लगाते हैं, फिर उनको पोंछते हैं डिटॉल से या सैनिटाइजर से पोंछकर टेबल में पोंछते हैं, फिर हमारे बच्चों को देते हैं सैनिटाइजर दे देते उनको क्लास में देते हैं. फिर दिन में जैसे खाना लंच का टाइम होता है बच्चों का, फिर हम लोग आते हैं सफाई करते हैं तो वो डालते हैं डिटॉल वगैरह डाल के फिर जाते हैं. मतलब ये कोरोना की वजह से थोड़ा ज़्यादा भी बच्चों पे ध्यान देना पड़ा.
Having masks on compulsory, carrying masks with you so that in case the students don't have access to it or tend to have their excuses of I left it at home, how can you provide it to them? How can you leverage organizations or even Teach for India to ensure that the student is physically safe with masks, sanitizers, entry checks on a regular basis to let students know that you are serious about their safety, convincing their parents that you are aware of the safety requirements.
First of all, I will say that I take care of my own safety much more importantly because my safety will eventually matter to the kids also. So I try to wear mask all the time whenever I am outside. I keep sanitizing my hands, and there are provisions from the school also that entrance, exit, everywhere there are sanitizers.
Actually, I love karate. So I think स्कूल में कराटे टीचर और कराटे क्लास तो होना ही चाहिए.
There should be physical exercise and sport in every school, so we can feel a little stress free.
जैसे हमारे स्कूल में जो सैनिटाइजर आता है वो अच्छा प्योर सैनिटाइजर नहीं होता. हमारे स्कूल में जैसे मास्क भी प्रोवाइड कराना चाहिए कुछ बच्चों को, जैसे किसी बच्चे का फट जाता है मास्क या खो जाता है तो.
So something which I expecting from everyone, from my teachers, from my mates, and from everyone who are behind me is that they support me, they motivate me in every difficult stuff of my life.
इंडियन एजुकेशन सिस्टम में मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि TFI जो है वो हर स्कूल में हो. तो जो भी है हमारे एरिया में, जो हम इतनी दूर आते हैं स्कूल इसलिए आते क्योंकि हमें टीच फॉर इंडिया का स्कूल मिला जिसमें टीच फॉर इंडिया है, तो इस वजह से हम इधर आते हैं. उधर हमारी साइड में भी काफ़ी स्कूल्स हैं लेकिन उसमें पढ़ाई वाली बात नहीं है, कोई स्कूल का कोई टाइमिंग नहीं है, कोई फिक्स नहीं है कुछ, इस वजह से हम यहाँ पर आते हैं.
students didn't feel like they were seen or heard for the longest time. And as an educator, I would want students to be the center of the education system right now and actually design practices and lessons in a way that they can contribute to.
2 years ago, the challenge was how can I ensure that the student is excelling in the best possible way academically or grade-wise. But now the challenge is to really bring the student to the classroom. I think over the 2 years, we've lost track of all our students and bringing each of them back on track and making the classroom an exciting space.
Happiness and safety is a multi-dimensional concept. While I think that students learn from those they like, but they also learn in places where they feel happy and safe. I don't see the pandemic as something of the past. I think that is something that we need to constantly reflect on. We need to evaluate what has been our biggest learnings from the entire experience that we've had for the past almost 1.5 to 2 years, and see how we can sort of identify the breakdowns there, take those learnings and then implement it for our classrooms to be strengthened in the future.
I think the most important role for me that I identify in rebuilding the system will be to ignite the fire of learning inside the kids, that they become self-aware learners.
So because I teach mathematics and I've seen that in the last 2 years there is a huge learning loss. So students do not know the basics of mathematics. So in the very beginning of the class, I ensure that they solve at least 5 questions of addition, subtraction and multiplication, so that they are good with basics. So if they are not good with basics, they will not be able to understand what I'm going to teach them. So yeah, these are few structures which I try to inculcate in my classroom.
So my hope for the Indian education system is that we will be able to do justice to the national education policy and curriculum, which talks about holistic education, which talks about meeting every child at their own level, which talks about bringing equity, equality and representation in the classroom, basically making the classroom a microcosm of a larger, the world's largest democracy.
It is so heartwarming to see all the hard work that has been put in to ensure that learning continues in perhaps the most difficult challenge the world has faced in a long time. A big shout out to the entire team behind this episode, especially to the students and teachers for sharing their experiences with us. Up next, we have Michelle Culver joining us to talk to us about reimagining school networks in her session towards promising partnerships with schools. Michelle is the co-founder of the Systems Learning Lab powered by Teach for America. She leads this exploratory space alongside an extraordinary network of leaders working on the future of learning at the intersection of equity and innovation. Welcome, Michelle. Over to you.
Hey, you all. I am Michelle Culver. I'm the founder of the Reinvention Lab at Teach for America, where we wake up every day asking ourselves, how do we transform ourselves in service of transforming learning? And I have to say, I am really pleased to join you all. The very last trip I made before the pandemic was to India to visit and be a part of the Teach for India and KER's immersive experience. And the last few years have been profoundly different for me as a result of being inspired by your youth leaders, and the leadership I saw across so many different communities when I was visiting. So my hope is to gift you a little bit back about what's been inspiring me and what's on my heart and mind here in the US. I'm calling in from my home in Denver, Colorado. And this is a recording because of time zones, but I invite you to be in conversation with me afterwards, and I'll share my email for those of you who want to share questions, ideas, things that this might spark in this conversation. So I hope that this can be a bit more multi-directional than this recording will allow. So we're going to jump right in, and today's focus for this conversation is thinking about what is possible for reimagining the role of educators in our schools. And I come into this conversation with this metaphor. It has shaped my own approach to education right now pretty considerably. This is the Bay Bridge in San Francisco, California. And you can see on the left, there is this old bridge. It had been built many years ago, and a friend of mine was observing the renovations of the creation from an old bridge into this new bridge. And what was important about this, and why you'll see how it's shaped my thinking about education, is that that old bridge has to work. Every day, hundreds of cars go back and forth on that bridge. They rely on it to go see family, to go to their school, to go to their jobs, for tourism. That bridge has to work. And yet it's clear it had become outdated. It was no longer up to the modern code, and it wasn't safe, actually. So the way they tended to this was to do two things simultaneously. One is to support the current bridge because it has to work, and even if it wasn't designed for today's needs, they needed it to be able to be productive. So they basically supported it, and simultaneously they had a different group of people, of engineers, who worked on the creation of the new bridge. And then piece by piece, you can see they responsibly moved the cars from one side to the next without ever stopping the flow of traffic. I invite you to start this conversation with me today to reflect on the state of education through a similar lens. You know, we know that education today was designed well over 100 years ago at a time where we never thought that girls, or at least in this country, kids of color, would be able to grow up and lead and contribute to the workforce. It was designed at a time where they were trying to build a working class for the Industrial Revolution. And in our country, it was also built on an agrarian calendar. I don't know if you all have summers off like we do, but those things are no longer the needs of today, and they do not serve our young people. And so our bridge is really outdated. And in fact, I would say there are storms around it, putting even more and unprecedented pressure on that old bridge. And so there's two things that we have to do. One is simultaneously make sure that we prop it up in order to ensure that kids today who have only that year and that grade get the education they need, and still simultaneously design something radically new to meet the needs that we now face as different from 100 years ago. So with that, I'm going to point us to the creation of a new bridge and asking ourselves, how do we respond to this moment by thinking not just about how do we improve and prop up our current system, but how might we design what we actually really want? And one of the things that are happening in this country, we're now back at the place where we've been back to school a little longer than I believe you all have been. And folks are starting to ask, gosh, this has been a hard year for both kids, young people, as well as for the adults. And what if these adults don't want to come back to the system, that it becomes harder to recruit new teachers into the profession? What if folks are just so fatigued by how hard it has been to educate through this pandemic? And maybe we find ourselves in a teacher shortage. So the question I've been asking is, well, how might we redesign the role of an educator for radically different learning? And I use this language, how might we redesign, because it invites possibility. The system or the bridge was once designed one way, and now there might be ways in which we could recreate and redesign the purpose of this next phase of our learning systems. And maybe it's no longer a bridge. Maybe it's jet skis. Maybe it's an airplane. Maybe it's a boat. There's all kinds of ways to get there. And we get to sort of expand our opportunities to think about all the ways in which we might redesign the current system. And in this case, I ask, for a radically different learning environment, for radically different learning. We know that, again, what kids have been taught to do, to regurgitate information, to answer tests where you could honestly just Google that information on your phone, that's not actually preparing us for the kind of learning in order to lead and learn and thrive and shape this world as it's evolving around us. And I say educator. In our country, we often use the word teacher, and that suggests a person who stands in front of the classroom, who's trained with a lot of sort of credentials in order to have the right to stand in front of the classroom. And I want to think about an educator, who are all of the adults, who are all of the people who help us shape a young person's learning. And how might we think it more expansively about those combinations of people from different places, from different communities, from different sectors, from different ages, who might all become educators if we start to imagine that a little bit differently than a traditionally trained teacher. So how might we redesign the role of an educator for radically different learning? Before we get any further, I want to invite you to do a little reflection for yourself. What was your most meaningful learning experience? I'm going to give you a little sense of what mine was, at least one that comes to my mind today, and then invite you to do the same. And you can do that in the chat functions or on your own journal. But the question is, what stands out to you as a particularly profound or meaningful learning experience? And for me, one of the ones that I most remember did not actually happen in school. It happened in a summer leadership camp that I went to when I was about 14 or 15. And what I was doing was invited to participate with young people from all across my region. With very different backgrounds. And together we were given a task. It was a simulation. It wasn't a real task, but man, it felt real to us. And they said, pretend you are a company and you have to decide where to put your plant. Where in our state, in our region, are you going to put it? Well, what ended up happening is it became incredibly intense for us to try to, as a group, make this important decision. Because for the kids who came from the city, they felt like, you can't put it in our community because we have historically been displaced and marginalized. There's already so much poverty. This is just going to have an outsized impact on our families. For the kids who grew up in the country, they said, you can't put this power plant by the river because the pollution is going to impact the fish. And all of a sudden you could see all of these different interests, all of which were right, but created a real conflict for us to try to reconcile coming to life. So what we were learning was, how to make decisions across lines of so many differences and to communicate, to listen, to make hard consequential choices. And it was really intense. And the way it worked was we were basically set up with a task, and then the adults all stepped back and let us work through it. And we'd work, and then we'd learn by doing and making some mistakes and having intense conversation. And then we'd pause, and they would facilitate learning for reflection. How did it go? What was the effect that had? How do you feel about that? What did you notice about yourself? What did you notice about others? So it was really quite profound. And some of the adult friends that I have now today were shaped by that early experience. So, and it happened, by the way, too, on a college campus. So I was not yet in university. And yet I was imagining myself at a setting that was so different from what I experienced when I was back at home. So I want you now to take a moment and ask, what was your most meaningful learning experience? And just as I did, ask yourself, what made it so memorable? What specifically were you learning? Why did that learning matter? With whom were you learning? And what did power look like in that relationship? Where were you when it was happening? And how did this come to life? The last question is about how available was this type of learning for all kids. For me, it was a free program, so we had lots of different backgrounds of kids who were there, but it still only happened for a couple weeks in the summer. It wasn't embedded in a school day, so not everybody had access to it, even if it was free. What I hope you're starting to discover is that learning is happening in lots of different places with lots of different people for lots of different purposes. And where it becomes really powerful is when there's alignment and intentionality brought to it. There's no right or wrong, good or bad. There's lots of answers when we start to dream into what this new bridge can look like, but we have some wisdom from which to draw upon. when learning already is working for us? So one of the frameworks we use in the Reinvention Lab is a set of questions that allow us to interrogate why young people are learning, what's the purpose of that learning, what they are learning, how, with whom, where, and how we make sure that that's equitable and available for all folks. So as we get into this next section, keep that frame in your mind. It will help you figure out what is more and less resonant for you. So we're going to move into a section where I'm going to offer 4 pieces of inspiration. These are 4 different organizations in the United States who I think are pushing in interesting ways about the role of an educator in creating radically different learning environments. And so my hope in offering inspiration and provocation for you is not to suggest this is the right answer or you should do what they're doing, but rather to get your juices flowing and say, what about what they're doing is interesting, or prompting me to imagine something different, or even challenging me, or maybe I disagree with it. That's all good. Pay attention to it. That's where we start to imagine different possibilities when we have something sometimes to react to that's different from our day-to-day. So the first group I want to introduce you to is called the Brooklyn STEAM Center in New York. Now, what I love about this place is that it is an actual industrial park where there are hundreds of businesses, and young people go to their own home school. They're like not school at home, but their community-based school, the high school that they would typically go to. And then for a portion of that day and week, they leave that school and they come to this place at the Brooklyn STEAM Center. And the focus of that time is all around innovation, career, and technical training. And so they immerse themselves in actual real businesses and start to learn the kinds of things that are going to enable them to be successful in the careers and jobs that they might want for themselves. So they're doing real work. They're building networks, learning how to be in relationship with others, and getting actual certificates that allow them to be more competitive when they go to apply for these jobs later. It's very, very real world focused. So what's the roles the adults are playing? So what allows them to happen is that because they're working on things like computer science, construction, culinary arts, design and engineering, film and media, they go to the sectors, the field where people do that work already. They love the work that they're doing and they want to share and bring this in for young people. They're not necessarily trained teachers. So we were now all of a sudden enrolling industry experts in education. Those folks may not have seen themselves as teachers, and yet here they are, serving as incredible educators, shaping our young people. Another group that I find inspiring, this is a new organization called Step Mojo. What if students could benefit from the best of their virtual and in-person learning? So in this new online platform, they offer their classes virtually, but kids get to take it while they're in their school setting. So they choose the classes that best suit them from a catalog of lots of different options. So you might want to take an AP computer science class or a financial literacy class or cybersecurity, but your school might not have that at your school. You may not have a teacher who teaches that. Well, here you can sit in your school and get offered that curriculum from experts, who do teach that content. And what that allows us to do is to find adults, some of whom actually oversee the learning environment where you're sitting at your computer and getting this access to this course. But you don't have to be a classically trained teacher to do that. And then you have a lead content teacher who delivers this instruction online, who loves teaching in that format. Okay. Inspiration number 3. One Stone. This is a school in Idaho, and they have really pushed my thinking. Here they ask, what if young people drove more of their learnings and adults supported that? So very specifically, this is a place that has really privileged youth leadership in driving their own learning. In fact, the board is made up of young people. And here you walk into the building and you don't see kids sitting compliant in rows. You see kids selecting and shaping what curriculum they want the teachers to design classes on to influence. They move through the spaces fluidly in different classes that they are set up to drive and choose. They work on their own individual and group projects based on their interests. And the adults in this case are not just teaching them or imparting wisdom into them, they're guiding them and supporting them and figuring out how to help these young people drive exactly what they're learning and how they're learning it. So in this case, the role of the teacher is to guide, not just to deliver content. And so imagine what this starts to look like with who then is qualified to be a teacher and what good teaching looks like. The last example I want to use is one at a university who does teacher preparation. And they're saying, what if we don't have a teacher supply problem, but rather a workforce design problem? And so here, this is a setup of an average classroom of third graders. So what is that? Probably 9-year-olds who have a classroom of one teacher to about 25 students. Now, I've been in a lot of the classrooms in India, and I understand there's often far more students than that for one teacher. But imagine if you took a group of those teachers and said, okay, instead of doing the same thing in each of these classrooms 4 times over, what if instead you imagined it differently, of a team? So you had one of those 4 people who was a lead teacher, 2 of them who were professional teachers. We still value what, you know, a traditional teacher can bring, but that frees you up to think now very differently, perhaps about paid teacher residents from the community, community educators, folks who specialize in particular areas of focus or content, people who float back and forth between the different groups. There's so many ways you get freed up to start to imagine the kind of people and what they would do if you don't think about one person as responsible for all of their kids' needs, but rather a group of people working to meet multiple different needs. And the truth is, there's a lot of teaming already happening anyway, but we could staff it and be even more intentional about it. And when you look at other sectors, this is not uncommon. This is a photo from a hospital where it says, who's in my room today? And you can see the ways in which all of these different people are working together to meet your needs as a patient. Similarly, perhaps you could have a team of adults all working together differently to meet your needs as a learner. Okay, so what I'd love to now do is pause and ask, what struck you from this? What stood out to you? What do you love? What are you curious about? What do you disagree with? What makes you inspired or uncomfortable? Let's just pause and take a few minutes. So again, just take stock. What struck you from this initial inspiration? Just engage in a possible extension of this. So the question for you is, if you're having fun with this, how else might you think expansively about what could exist in this second bridge? And what are your own opinions? You've gotten some provocation about how other innovators in the United States have started to answer some of these questions. How would you want to answer these questions? So number one, why do you think young people should be learning? What's the purpose of education from your perspective? What do you want young people to learn based on that? What would they value? What would they know? What would they be able to do? How might they learn those things? Where would that take place? With whom? And then how do we ensure that this is possible for all kids? So if you're having fun with this, you want to engage in any of the ideas I've offered today, push my own thinking, or offer something back, questions or inspirations, you can reach me at Michelle, MICHELLE .Culver, CULVER at teachforamerica.org. Thanks so much for jumping in with me, and I look forward to hearing what this sparks. Hope you have a beautiful rest of your day. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle, for taking us on that reflective learning journey. I think a very meaningful learning experience that I was a part of was a group discussion with students where a 9-year-old girl said that we must begin with love, because if we do not have love, then what do we really have? And on that note, I welcome Parag, Director of Government Relations at Teach for India, to close the first brilliant, magnificent day one of inspirED 2022. Parag leads our partnership and collaboration efforts with city and state governments across the country. Welcome, Parag, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Adam, and thank you again for everyone joining in today. I think what we've shown today is we really have a very, very amazing and a very, very engaged community of stakeholders. We had 3,000 plus registrations, 45 plus different speakers, 25 plus different partners sign up, and hundreds of you joined us online across different platforms. So really just sort of your initiative to attend this conference, to learn from this conference is really appreciated, but also demonstrates sort of your commitment and sort of your will to improve education for almost every child, not only in our country, but across the globe as well. I'll share some of my major takeaways as well, but if you can go onto your chat and maybe type in what was sort of that one learning that you're taking away from today, any specific session, any specific speaker, any quote that you remember from today would be amazing to hear from you as well. So we'll give you roughly about 30 seconds to a minute to type down your responses, and we'll highlight a few of them while you type it down. But we'd love to hear what is that one thing that you are taking away from everything that we learned from all our speakers, panelists, students, experts, educators from our sessions today. As you're typing down, I was scrolling through some of the responses, and I remember one of the comments that an educator wrote down, which really, really touched me. And he said, as educators, it doesn't matter if the mode of schooling is online, if the mode of schooling is in person, or if the mode of schooling is hybrid. We as educators can make a difference. And I think that was very inspiring, and it's absolutely true. That all this entire community is coming together to do a lot of different things as well. So thank you for that as well. Would love to see some of your learnings come in as we go through. But let me share one or two things that I learned across some of the sessions as well. And by no means is this the primary takeaway, but it's one or two things that I really took to heart. In the first session with Roshni, I think the three things that struck out was her saying, real learning does not always happen on the screen. It happens outside these classrooms. And I think you saw that theme across all the different panelists today as well, which is we must connect learning outcomes with life skills. There is synergy between the two. And the fact that, children can help provide the context we live in. They can help define the world that we are growing up in, and that there is a lot of power there. In the next session, I'm seeing some comments come in through this, which is not to instruct, but to invite. So from our panel discussions, I love that, which is creating a mindset that invites, that really opens our mind and gets ideas, not just instructs one way in our minds. Again, a really good highlight that came out here as well, which is, rebuilding our schools, rebuilding this system that's been devastated over the last few years must start with the heart, and that's where we should be focused on, because there's just so much that's going on in our lives today. Again, taking away the mindset shift, this mindset shift from going from obedience to respect as a way to unleash the student voice, and thank you for that, Shaheen, is understanding that obedience is very different from respecting someone else's opinion and giving our students an ability and a chance to express that as well. Finding that collective will across all of our communities, all of our stakeholders, to bring those ideas to scale. We must work together. Again, a lot of different learnings from the panel discussion here as well, but these were some of the biggest ones that I took away, and I'll keep reading some of those out as they come through. Again, in our last session with Michelle, I think the three things that struck out to me was, as adults, as partners, as experts, we can share what we do. We can provide a learning in our own way, in a very non-traditional way it's possible. And she gave some really good examples of organizations that are doing that. She also mentioned that adults can guide and support children in driving what they are learning. And this comes from the idea that, we can go out to children and we can listen to them and speak to them and talk about their ideas and help them really bring out what they are trying to do in their own learning journeys as well. And I think through the questions Michelle taught us, there's just so much room for us to reflect. There's so much room for us to adapt and asking sort of the right questions those were some of the biggest takeaways here as well. And I'm seeing, some amazing comments that is coming from the community of stakeholders here. So preparing children for life is definitely more important. Getting those outcomes that are connected to life skills, and how do we do that? How do we make that connection? That was a big theme that was coming out across the board as well. We knew, again, assessments must be tailored to students. So amazing things, and you saw some of the videos and all the journey that students have been through. And there's just so much more reason, given today's concept, to go and build something that's just bigger and better. So just sort of wrapping everything up, as you know, today was our focus on schools and schooling, and we wanted to give everyone just a quick context on where we are today and what is happening. We heard from educators, students, we heard from a lot of different panelists and experts across the board. And this just sets the context of just how grave the problem is in across the entire chain as well. But what we'll really be doing tomorrow is focusing on, well, now what? Now that we know the problem, now that we've heard some of the solutions, well, how do we really build this future all together? And I think in the inspirED Chronicles video, you saw some of those really harsh figures, 9 to 14 years to recover the learning loss that's essentially been generated over the last few years, 9% of a loss of future learning income, 24 million children, again, at the risk of permanently dropping out of school. And this just shows the gravity of the problem. But the real challenge here is, well, now how do we build back? How do we build back that future? And I think tomorrow's session is really going to be focusing a lot on that. We'll start with what is that gap and how do we bridge that gap? We'll hear from some really, really interesting minds, some great innovators and entrepreneurs who've done amazing things to bridge that gap, not only in our rural schools, but also in our urban schools as well. The slight focus on bridging the gap specifically in early childhood education as well. And we'll bring it all together again with panelists in the learning spots. We'll have organizations like Center Square Foundation, Dream a Dream, Google coming to our sessions tomorrow. So please definitely, dial in as you did today and be as actively engaged of a community as you were today. I will end with a poem that I found online, and this really touched me. So I'll narrate it and I'll leave you with this. And the poem is, I am back. The day has come, I am back, I say. I find my seat and start the day. Sharpen pencils, big grin. I just can't wait to dive on in. My teacher looks like so much fun. My learning here has just begun. I'll meet new friends and old ones too. I'm feeling great. How about you? With that, thank you everyone. Thanks a lot. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow on our second day of inspirED. Thanks everyone.
Thank you for closing this out so wonderfully. inspirED Day 1 is officially over. I will now quickly take you through a short tour of our website and how you can access your certificate. So need to log into firki.co, and once logged in, click on what we offer, go to conferences, and here you will be able to see inspirED 2022 listed. Just click on it and scroll down and enroll yourself into the conference. Once you're enrolled, you will be able to see all our partners and the agenda items for each of the days. If you click on all these different session numbers, you will be able to see a detailed agenda for that specific session. Yeah. In order to receive your certificate, you will need to fill a feedback form that will be displayed over here. Once you open the feedback form, click on answer the questions, rate all the questions. For example, the first one is the quality of sessions at inspirED 22 was up to the mark. You can choose the option that you want to, and then scroll down and fill up all the remaining options. Once you fill all the options and enter any thoughts that you want to, you can click on submit your answers. Once you do that, you can continue, go back to the main page. You can again scroll down and click on certificate for day 1 keynote address. You click on view certificate. Your certificate will be generated automatically and you could download it. Yeah. Thank you so much for staying with us throughout all the sessions. Have a fantastic rest of the evening. Bye-bye.